Good afternoon, Chairman Gray and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Corey Fox. I'm Counsel for Policy and Government Affairs at FanDuel. I want to thank the Chairman and the committee staff for their hard work in studying this issue. FanDuel appreciates the opportunity to provide information and to work with the legislature to ensure that Californians can continue to play the games that they love. I know that the fantasy sports industry has been in the news quite a bit recently, but fantasy sports aren't new. They've been around for at least 30 years. Since the 1990s, fantasy sports have been online, and there's no doubt that the internet has been an engine for growth and innovation for the fantasy sports industry, just as it has been for so many other consumer products and services, especially here in California. Online fantasy sports businesses have made it possible and simple for me, like millions of others, to play in fantasy sports leagues with a circle of old friends from home, even though many of us have left the Bay Area since attending high school in San Mateo. When my daughter was born in November 2014, one of the first emails I sent was to my fantasy football email listserv, where my friends responded by encouraging me to name my daughter after the 2014 World Series MVP, Madison. These are some of the most important friendships in my life, and fantasy sports are a conduit to maintain these friendships in spite of our busy schedules and geographic distance. As you will hear from others, fantasy sports have long been a part of American sports culture, and fantasy offerings continue to evolve. In 2009, FanDuel's co-founders realized they might be able to address some of the growing user frustration with traditional fantasy sports, which had existed in more or less the same format for over 25 years. In season-long fantasy sports, a participant's place in the draft often had a lasting and significant effect on his fantasy team's performance, and a top draft pick's injury early in the season could mean that one team was essentially out of contention for the duration of the contest. As a result, some participants in a fantasy league would lose interest and stop playing, decreasing the fun for the whole group. Whereas everyone liked the process of selecting a team, and those who made the playoffs found that experience another high point, most player dissatisfaction focuses on those weeks after teams fell out of contention. FanDuel designed its DFS contest to respond to this feedback. Instead of being stuck with the same team where a bad draft could put you hopelessly behind with nothing to do but wait for the season to end, you could select a new team every week. In a certain sense, every week was a new opportunity to draft a team and play a playoff game. Our games were designed to be highly social and mobile-friendly. We thought it was a more fun way to play, and our fans agreed. Today, fantasy sports continue to evolve. There are head-to-head contests, draft and auction leagues, keeper leagues, and large-format tournaments. There are contests that last a day, contests that last a week, contests that last part of a season or for an entire season, and contests that carry on for years with players signing their athletes to fantasy contracts. Regardless of the format, fantasy players carefully evaluate the relative value of the athletes based on their likelihood to earn fantasy points, and win or lose based on their selections. FanDuel is now a thriving technology startup with over 5 million users, including hundreds of thousands of sports fans in California. FanDuel operates an office in Los Angeles, and just last weekend hosted our World Championship of Fantasy Football in San Diego, where FanDuel finalists got the thrill of a lifetime as they caught passes from NFL legend Joe Montana during a fantasy scouting combine. 49ers fans would appreciate that. We take pride in our role as a leader in the tech community. We've been recognized many times for this leadership role, including a 2015 People's Choice Award for Best Mobile Sports App, and being recognized as a Top 100 Brilliant Company by Entrepreneur magazine. FanDuel is committed to being a good corporate citizen. To that end, FanDuel regularly hosts charity contests throughout the year for a variety of causes, including the American Cancer Society and Wounded Warrior Project. FanDuel's investors include a who's who of the American sports media and private equity landscape: Google, Comcast, NBC Sports, Time Warner, KKR, Shamrock Capital, and others. Fantasy sports providers and sports teams are committed to enhancing sports fans' relationships with the teams and players they love, as we heard earlier. This shared love for sports is what has led FanDuel to partner with professional sports teams and leagues. Today, FanDuel serves as the exclusive one-day fantasy sponsor of 16 teams in the National Basketball Association, including the Los Angeles Lakers, and another 16 teams in the National Football League, including the San Diego Chargers. FanDuel is also the official one-day fantasy partner of the National Basketball Association. These relationships allow us to partner together with teams to bring FanDuel players incredible sports fan experiences, like pregame field passes, courtside seats, or even the opportunity to be general manager for a day. FanDuel understands that our industry's ability to grow and flourish depends on operating our platforms in a transparent manner that consumers trust. We are committed to doing our part to earn and maintain that trust and stand ready to work with legislators and solutions to that regard. In conclusion, we want to work with you to ensure that fantasy contests are legal, safe for consumers, and continue to provide the same great entertainment value that has driven our growth over the past few years. We believe that the best path forward for the fantasy sports industry is to craft regulatory solutions that will allow the millions of users who love fantasy sports to continue to play. and most importantly, to do so on platforms operated by legitimate U.S. companies with a demonstrated commitment to working with regulators. FanDuel thanks Chairman Gray and his staff for their hard work on this issue, and we look forward to continue working together during this next session. Thank you for your time, and I'll answer any questions.
Thank you, Chairman Gray and committee members. I realize sitting here that I am the one who looks nothing like anybody else on this panel. I must note I am not a digital native, and when I was in high school, the only potential role I could have played in basketball was as a cheerleader. I did not, for the record. But I'm delighted to be here today because what I do care about is business innovation. I care about fairness for government, and I want to tell you why I am here today particularly. I have served as a district attorney for 8 years in Massachusetts doing white-collar crime and child abuse. I served as an organized crime strike force prosecutor for a while in the federal government in the late 80s. Most recently, I served as the elected Attorney General of Massachusetts, where one of our biggest roles was in providing fairness for consumers, whether it was against large banks, in identity theft issues. We started a healthcare division, and my focus as Attorney General was always to make sure that we understood what we were trying to regulate or bring cases against so that we would get the right result. And I think Massachusetts has been known as a state that's tough but fair for consumers and also for businesses. I had the opportunity to meet last August the founders of DraftKings. As you have heard, they are from Boston. They'd like to stay in Boston. Jason Robbins is fond of telling at least Massachusetts legislators that he was offered some investment money in California, but he wanted to stay in Boston. So I do have a vested interest in keeping a cutting-edge industry that's consumer tech, that I think takes a little bit of understanding to not just stay in Massachusetts and grow, but to be part of what is a new wave and an innovation and knowledge economy in this country that will help us come out of this last great recession and continue to do well. I understand that their commitment to this game and their good idea and their implementation of it, as well as their fast acceleration of growth, as I said to them, would cause a lot of attorneys general and regulators, legislators, as well as media scrutiny. And so I began talking with them about some of those issues, again, particularly with focus on consumer protection, the need to be transparent, the need to make sure that the integrity of the game was secure, because I believe, as I think both FanDuel, DraftKings, and the industry believes, this business model will not succeed if the players in it do not have trust that the game is fair, and that they know how it works and they know what their participation level is going to be. It is important, and as you saw and heard already about the incredible scrutiny on this game, including a so-called insider trading episode that later proved to be unfounded, and it has been addressed, by the way, with policy changes, which I think is a good model for these growing companies to recognize and to work with regulators when they see issues of perception or other issues of unfairness. And they want to make sure, because I'm aware they've reached out to attorneys general around the country and regulators to be transparent and to explain the business model so that those who are going to take steps to regulate will make good decisions and make reasonable decisions. I think that one of the things that's important is to make sure that regulation allows for growth but provides for the players who love this game. And by the way, it's a very popular game. I know that from meeting with legislators, meeting with my colleagues, young and old. It's not a game for everybody, but for those who play it, it's very popular. And it allows for the kind of engagement that you've heard about from the sports teams here today, as well as from the people on this panel, in a way that they cannot otherwise engage in sports. And that's one of the reasons I think that it has become so popular. So what kind of steps can you take to look to regulate it? We have heard in the past from those who look at this, and it's a way I've approached regulation, is what are the risks that you're concerned about, and how are the ways that you would manage those risks? So there's been a lot of talk about, well, does it look like this game or that game or other kinds of ventures in the past, and there will be those discussions around skill and chance. But for this panel's purposes, I think taking the approach that, frankly, Massachusetts has taken, understanding that There are risks, as there were, for instance, when we looked at the advent of MySpace. At the time, we were very concerned about age verification for young people going on MySpace. By the way, does anybody remember MySpace? But it was of great interest to us in setting up our cybercrime division, in doing consumer protection on Internet activities. By the way, I have learned, and I'm sure you have also, that for this generation, making dinner reservations, finding a house, finding a job, getting married, and frankly, playing takes place on Internet. And I hope that we all will recognize that in providing reasonable safeguards. Attorney General Healy, my successor in Massachusetts, undertook a process in meeting with stakeholders, including DraftKings and FanDuel, to take a look at the business model and understand it so that she and her consumer protection staff could recognize the risks they were concerned about based upon their experience and draft a set of regulations that I think, if you look at them, and we're happy to provide them to you if you haven't seen them, address the kinds of buckets of concern that they had. Younger children, transparency to players, those who might have problems with compulsive behavior. And so in looking at those risks and developing a set of regulations that are in comment period now, I think that process has been a thoughtful one, and I think it's been an instructive one. Different states will take different processes. Your laws are different. Your cultures are different. We did not in Massachusetts, by the way, have any gaming other than a state lottery until recently. I served as Attorney General while that was being crafted, and we spent a great deal of time in making sure that if we were going to bring casinos into Massachusetts, that we would do it right. I pointed out we didn't even have a anti-money laundering statute in Massachusetts, but we do have one now. And so all of these new enterprises require the kind of risk assessment and appropriate regulation that will address those risks. And I'm delighted that you are taking this process seriously, not just today, but in the time you've taken up until today and going forward to do that. The Massachusetts draft regulations would enact extensive consumer protection, including raising a minimum age limit to 21. And I believe it includes looking at the amateur sports, the college sports issue. Those are concerns that regulators have. We know that there are a range of issues that those regulations address, but California can choose its own route, of course. What I would suggest is that there are states like Illinois and Florida who have draft legislation pending. Those are, I believe, include reasonable consumer protections. Some of them specifically clarify that this is a legal enterprise. I think that's part of the ambiguity that people have understanding what this is. It's important for states to do that and to strike the right balance so that the industry can move forward, consumers are protected, and that you don't provide unreasonable barriers to entry in this marketplace. I think that as you consider legislation introduced next year by Chairman Gray, thank you for that, we hope you will take these things into account, into balance. And I know I would be delighted to continue to be helpful to you with what other states have done. I know you have a ton of resources here in California, so I'm sure you will have those at your beck and call. But I do hope you will keep in mind finding a way to allow this innovative, knowledge-based, consumer tech-savvy industry to continue to grow while addressing those risks that we always have with the new industry and consumer protection. So thank you for allowing us to testify today.
Thank you, committee, for the invitation to speak today. My name is Trent Frasina. I'm the co-founder and creative director of FantasyAces.com. We're a daily fantasy sports website, startup in Southern California, based in Aliso Viejo. Our company, FantasyAces.com, started in 2012. The website was live and open to the public in March of 2013 for baseball season. Our company was initially formed by myself, my brother, Brian Frasina, my father, Tom Frasina, and one silent partner. We all put in our own money. It was about several $100,000, pretty much all we had. And we pursued the American dream of starting our own company. We saw a huge opportunity, and we went for it. In a short amount of time, we went from being a company with 2 employees with no income, working full-time for roughly 2 years, to seeing great success and growth and receiving notoriety in this industry. And we now have 8 full-time employees. They have full-time job, full-time salary with benefits, and it's very exciting for us to see starting from nowhere, making some great headways in this industry as it continues to grow. We see that if our growth is not stunted, that most likely we will double or even triple our head count internally by the end of next year. That's also very exciting for us, and obviously we're offering jobs to Californians. We have multiple marketing partnerships that are in the state of California, and it's exceeded roughly $500,000 in this last year in spending in Southern California for marketing with businesses. We have multiple content contractors that we pay on a consistent basis. They are also California residents. We've hired a local film student crew from Chapman University in Orange, California to shoot some of our promotional video material. It's pretty exciting for them to basically receive some of their first paychecks like that. We've spent several $100,000s in the local markets and local events we've had in Orange County for our live fantasy sports championships in Southern California as well. And we're going to continue to do so. That's just shedding some color on what we've done in California and what our business has done directly to the economy here. In regards to our business for California, California makes up roughly 12% of our user base. Our California members generate roughly almost 20% of our gross revenues in game entries. And that's pretty much our quick summary here. We're not here to elaborate on the game of skill. I think our friends over here at FanDuel and DraftKings have done a great job of that, as well as Peter from RotoWire. So that will conclude my testimony. Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Mike Olson, CFO of Fantasy Aces. I'm one of those employees that Trent spoke about. I will give a short testimony. While we are a California-based company, we are all employees are from California. We've grown up in Bay Area, Central Valley, and Southern California, and we'd like to stay. We all love California, and we all love fantasy sports, daily fantasy sports, and are hoping to find a good marriage here where the consumers are protected and we can provide good contests and have good time with the users. From a financial perspective, I want to be here for that reason to answer any questions that might pertain to Fantasy Aces and on the financial side. So with that, I'll conclude my testimony.
Okay, thank you all for your testimony this afternoon. If we dive into a few of the details, we talked about some of the safeguards that this committee would be debating as we look at a regulatory framework. Do the companies represented, where are we at on age? I mean, do we have a age verification in place, and do you have a age limit?
Yeah, for FanDuel, and I know several other companies as well, we're 18 and up. It's part of our terms of use, but also we have a Know Your Customer technology offered by a third-party provider, which we've been implementing over those past several months and are basically complete, implementing which verifies identity and age so that we can ensure that our players are over 18 and that also that they don't have more than one account.
We are also 18 and over. I believe it's 2 states where the age is 19. We also use third-party providers, KYC technology, and other sources to verify a customer's age.
And do you all use geolocation technology?
Yes, we partner with a company that provides geolocation technology to know where you are based on IP address or mobile tower. And
the issue of skill versus chance, I'm neither a lawyer nor an expert in fantasy sports, but from what I've read and the information that's provided me, there seems to be a large percentage of the contests won by a small percentage of the players. Is that true?
I think that's inherent in any skill-based game, right? We both probably play golf, we play tennis, You know, the good players, only a certain number of players win the majors. You know, eventually the good players are going to do better than the not good players. But you can get better in a skill game. You can learn. You can improve. And so that's why, you know, that's the disparity in any skill-based game.
And I'll just add that, you know, we offer a variety of ways to play our game. You can play in a private league. You can play in a 50-50 contest where the top 50% win. So there are a variety of ways to play. Obviously, the very best players want to play in the tournaments with hundreds of thousands of users for the biggest opportunity.
Both DraftKings and FanDuel have games specifically for beginners. On DraftKings, your first 50 contests in any given sport, you have the ability to play in contests where you're matched up against users that are only in their first 50 games of that, or first 50 contests of that sport. I believe FanDuel also as well.
Yeah, we have a beginner's lobby, which is similar to what Griffin described.
What about the issue of entries? I've explored both of your sites, and I've noticed some contests have a 3 entry per person limit versus some you could put, I assume, thousands of entries into a contest that might have 1 million entries in it. What are your thoughts on limiting versus not limiting the number of entries in a contest?
I think first off, I want to reiterate that we're here to work with your concerns and address them. DraftKings does have limits on its tournaments. There are limits on how many contests you can enter at small dollars, and there's also limits on how many entries you can place in a large tournament.
FanDuel's similar, but I also think we're here to work with you, but also I think a key is transparency. And as you noticed when you were looking at each of our sites, that we do list how many entries you can put. We have single entry games as well as multiple entry.
And from an industry perspective, daily fantasy sports has grown tremendously in the last couple of years. It's a new technology. There's been new business models. So there's been a lot of experimenting for how to do this. So we're open to, there's some new issues for us that have popped up, and so we're open to working with you to figure out the best practices here. If there are any issues with too many entries being a problem or not, we're willing to work with you. But there's a variety of formats out there.
I'll open it up for questions from the members. Mr. Linder?
Thank you. I wanted to ask what is being done either within the industry or maybe in other jurisdictions as far as compulsive gaming or something along those lines to help curb it?
Sure. So DraftKings has a responsible gaming page. It allows a user to go to the page. The user can exclude themselves, can put themselves in a timeout, or they can set limits for themselves. And I certainly understand your concern, and we're willing to work with you on what you think is the best formula moving forward.
We're also working on self-exclusion. So if users contact us and say that they shouldn't be on our site anymore, that they can't control it, then we'll go ahead and exclude them going forward.
If I could just add, I know that would help put my mic on. This is an area of interest to Attorney General Healy from her proposed regulations, and I know from some of the other AGs who have looked at it. So some of the safeguards that we put in place, for instance, in Massachusetts with the introduction of our brick-and-mortar casinos and with organizations that deal particularly with compulsive behavior, those resources are available and are something that I'm sure, again, I think my sense is that the industry wants to be cooperative and wants to eliminate, or mitigate certainly, the number of problem gamers, and to provide ways that people can self-eliminate, and other safeguards that may allow, in some instances, people not to play. They don't, for instance, extend credit, which I think is an important issue for people getting into trouble.
Mr. Levine.
Thank you. I want to understand a little bit of the business model for you. How do you set the take on your average game and set the bets and winnings for each game?
Sure. I mean, for each game, and it's transparent, there's a maximum amount of entries that can enter the contest, and also a payout structure that varies contest to contest. We've got a variety of different contests, but we're specific in our transparency about which positions make which prizes, and the difference between those contest entries and the prizes are the fee that FanDuel charges.
And what is the range of percentage for that take?
It varies, but maybe 8 to 12%, but at the maximum. But if we don't have as many entries, it can be much lower or even negative.
Okay. In September, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver stated that expanded legalized sports betting in the U.S. is inevitable, and that the league is open to participating in it. He said, and I quote, "If you have a gentleman's bet or a small wager on any kind of sports contest, it makes you that much more engaged in it. That's where we're going to see it pay dividends. If people are watching a game and clicking to bet on their smartphones, which is what people are doing right now, then it's much more likely you're going to stay tuned for a long time." So clearly the NBA draws no distinction between the way that you're engaging in whether it's an entry fee or a sports bet. I know that there's some talk about that. Can you tell us what the difference is?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that that's what that quote was saying. I think that the commissioner of the NBA was suggesting that he might be okay with sports betting, but he wasn't calling daily fantasy sports betting. That's a key distinction. One of the important differences is in integrity of the game. I know that with sports betting, there's typically concerns regarding the ability of a single player to go ahead and influence the bet itself, because daily fantasy sports typically involve 9 different players across 3 different teams. There isn't the same integrity concerns. The NBA, the Major League Baseball, the NHL, other big sporting organizations have looked into this, studied it carefully, and don't think those integrity concerns are present.
In the advertising that you guys do, and you do incredibly effective advertising, any guy on a couch wearing a jersey can win your game. But as David Boies has said, and as you have said, those with the specific skills who are paying attention are the ones who are going to be in the very best position to win in your games. So how do you kind of justify the marketing to, of course, get the market share that you want, but also really communicate to people that unless you're pretty sophisticated, you are more than likely to lose your money?
I mean, it's a skill game, right? So the first time you play tennis or the first time you play golf, you're not going to be very good. But you can work at it and you can get better and you will have a chance to win. So that's one of the things about it. Anyone can play fantasy sports, and if they put in the time and if they have the expertise, they will get better and they can win. And so that's what the nature of a skill game. In any one game, you could do good or do bad. If you played bowling, that's a skill game. We all believe that's a skill game. Any one frame, if I go against my 8-year-old daughter, she might beat me. Over the course of the game, I'm pretty much going to beat her every time. Over the course of a tournament, I'm going to beat her all the time. So just because somebody goes in the first time and they don't have the skills it takes to win, doesn't mean it's not a skill game.
In the work in collecting the money for the betting that people are doing, you're collecting information. You ask for social security numbers, you're asking for dates of birth, home addresses, people's names. Tell me a little bit about why you need that information, and explain the policies and procedures to protect that data. You're collecting it from people who not only are winning, although that's a small percentage of players, but also people who haven't won any money, as well as people who have lost money.
We take data security very seriously. We're committed to our customers. We're committed to protecting their information. We have the utmost standards in that respect. We've engaged various third parties to help us evaluate and refine our data security procedures. And the only information we collect is information that's essential to either verify a person's identity or their information for taxation or other purposes that we need it for business.
So even losing bettors need to give you a social security number if they haven't gained any money.
So on FanDuel's side, we do know your customer with KYC, as we were discussing earlier, to identify who is registering the account, so that we can ensure both that they're over 18 and that they only have one account on our system. We only collect social security numbers when we're unable to verify their identity based on address, name, and date of birth. We take data security extremely seriously, but it's also important for us to be able to verify the identity of the players on our site.
For some of your marketing partners, particularly people who, I've got friends who do DFS and they love it, and sometimes they hate it, but they get some phone calls on Sunday morning. So they're getting calls from people saying, we've got some inside information on what's going on, inside, quote unquote, inside, just marketing stuff. Are you selling that information to partners who then are reaching out to people to sell other products, so to give people an inside scoop, just like, hey, tune into the pregame show at 9 a.m., find out what players are warming up.
You're talking about people approaching and calling someone to say that they have information about a player or something like that?
Just other third-party marketing. So there's nothing illicit about this. I'm just saying there are companies that are reaching out to DFS bettors they're getting solicitations for other products. So do you have marketing partners that you sell your customers' information to then reach out for those third-party products?
No, not to my knowledge.
Not to my knowledge either.
Clearly, there's a robust market out there for information. That's my website, rotowire.com. We provide a lot of information to help people play, but that's just the nature of any kind of skill-based game.
More on the consumer protection front, are there any background checks that you conduct on any of your employees?
I'll have to get back to you. I'm not familiar with any background checks.
I'm not familiar. I will say we're constantly evaluating our procedures and have engaged parties to help us look at better business practices.
Earlier you talked about exclusion lists that people can go and say, I don't need to play, I need a timeout. How many people have availed themselves of this list? Do you share it between sites so that they can be protected from, if they've had a problem with FanDuel, that they don't exclude themselves from FanDuel and then move right over to DraftKings?
I do not have a figure on how many people have asked to be excluded.
I don't either. No, we don't share between sites. But again, we're here to discuss, the best possible practices, and we're open to discussing that so long as it's consistent with good privacy and data security principles, as you were discussing earlier.
Mm-hmm. You guys claim that it's not gambling. Gambling's not bad. It's just highly regulated. And yet, the partner that you're using for that. Help is for responsible gaming, which talks about pathological and youth gambling. So the addictive gambling tendencies that people have, they are exhibiting, as you acknowledge, in their play of DFS. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I think we've engaged an expert to help us understand behavior that occurs on fantasy sports sites. I'm not sure that we've fully grasped how much data there is out there. I mean, there's compulsive shopping, there's compulsive other behavior. We're constantly evaluating our procedures, and we're working to make a better product.
If the NCAA has requested that you don't offer their games, what has held you up from respecting that request?
So NCAA fantasy sports contests have been around for over 20 years. My company, rotowire.com, has covered fantasy college football and college basketball since the 1990s. It's been available to play for a long time. So it's been part of the landscape of fantasy sports for a long time. So we feel like it's a good business for the industry. It should continue. Also, the other thing is that there's no integrity issues with the gameplay, and that's one of the reasons why the NFL, for example, the NFL commissioner has come out and said that they're comfortable with daily fantasy sports because no single player could take a dive or alter his behavior to influence the outcome of a daily fantasy sports or fantasy sports contest. It's merely one of hundreds, if not thousands or millions, of possibilities to influence it. So we feel like it's the same thing with college sports as well. A college sports player would not be able to take money, alter his play on the field, and somehow alter a fantasy sports contest or a daily fantasy sports contest.